If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your interaction is what motivates us to continue bringing you touching content like this. Rain fell heavily on Pine Hollow, a small town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. The drops resonated like tiny drums on tin roofs, creating a melody that accompanied the night silence of this place, almost forgotten by time. In the county's only emergency station, Agent Robert Hayes organized some papers while drinking coffee that had already gone cold. At 60, with silver hair and deep and wrinkles framing kind but tired eyes, Robert was an institution in himself. More than 3 decades attending to emergencies in this region had given him a sixth sense for distinguishing between a routine call and something more disturbing. The phone rang, breaking the monotony of the early morning. "Emergency services, Agent Hayes," he answered automatically. At first, he only heard the sound of rain and breathing. He was about to hang up, thinking it was a lost call or some problem with the line, common during storms. Then he heard it. A small voice, barely a whisper. "There's something moving inside my tummy." The communication abruptly cut off. Robert stared at the receiver, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the dampness of that night. That childish voice painfully reminded him of Emily, Mrs. Thompson's granddaughter, for whom he could do nothing that winter 3 years ago. Too late, too far away. Susan, the technical operator, entered his office with a paper in hand. "I was able to trace the call, Robert," she informed him. "It's coming from the payphone in front of St. Luke's Church." Robert nodded thoughtfully. That phone was one of the few that still worked in town, mainly because the church still received regular electricity. "Any idea who it might be?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. No identification. The call lasted barely 10 seconds. Robert stood up, taking his raincoat from the coat rack, but as he did so, a twinge in his left knee made him stop. Damn arthritis, always worse with humidity. For an instant, the idea of waiting until morning crossed his mind. After all, it could be a simple prank by some bored teenager. But that little voice, "I'm going to check it out," he decided, rubbing his knee. Susan looked at him with concern. "Shouldn't you wait until dawn? The road is dangerous with this rain, and it could be a prank." Robert shook his head as he put on his raincoat. "Something tells me it's not a joke, Susan. And if there's a child who needs help, they can't wait until tomorrow." Before leaving, he made a call to Sarah Miller, a nurse from the only health center in the county and someone he trusted completely. He asked her to meet him at St. Luke's Church as soon as possible. The journey normally took 20 minutes, but the torrential rain and roads turned to mud lengthened the trip. As he drove along the winding mountain road, Robert couldn't get that childish voice out of his head. "There's something moving inside my tummy." What could it mean? Upon arriving in front of the church, he parked next to the old payphone that looked like a relic from another era. The rain had subsided a bit but still fell with enough force to soak anyone in seconds. The square was deserted, dimly lit by a street light that flickered, threatening to go out at any moment. Robert got out of the vehicle, covering himself with his raincoat, and walked toward the payphone. The receiver was hanging, swinging gently in the wind. Someone had used it recently. Robert looked around, scanning the darkness. The facade of the church, normally imposing during the day, now seemed like a ghostly silhouette. And then he saw her. A small, motionless figure under the church porch, a thin shadow with arms crossing her abdomen as if protecting it, or holding it. Her pink dress, barely visible in the dimness, clung to her little body from the rain, and her bare feet formed small puddles on the stone floor. Robert advanced slowly toward the small figure, trying not to frighten her. As he approached, the details became clearer. A girl of about 6 with wet black hair falling over her shoulders, a faded pink dress clinging to her body from the rain, and large, dark eyes that watched him without blinking. "Hello, little one," said Robert softly, crouching to her level despite the pain in his knee. "I'm Robert. I work in emergency services. Was it you who called on the phone?" The girl didn't respond. She kept her arms firmly crossed over her stomach as if protecting it. Her bare feet were covered in mud, and she trembled slightly. "What's your name?" Robert tried again. "Where are your parents?" After a long silence, the girl finally moved her lips. "He says I shouldn't talk," she whispered, so softly that Robert could barely hear her above the sound of the rain. "Who says that?" asked Robert, feeling a knot in his stomach. Before the girl could answer, a male voice resonated from the church door. "Ah, Agent Hayes, what brings you here at this hour?" It was Father Michael, a thin man in his 50s with thick-rimmed glasses, and an expression of surprise that didn't seem entirely genuine. He wore a robe over his pajamas and held a flashlight. "Good evening, Father," greeted Robert, straightening up. "We received an emergency call from the payphone. This little girl was here alone." Father Michael looked at the child as if seeing her for the first time. "This girl? How strange. I don't recognize her from town," he said, adjusting his glasses. "She must be lost. Have you asked her name?" Robert noticed the tension in the priest's voice. "She hasn't told me yet. She seems scared." At that moment, headlights from a vehicle illuminated the square. It was Sarah Miller, the nurse, arriving in her battered white pickup. She quickly got out, protected by a blue raincoat, and approached them. "What do we have?" she asked professionally, though her face softened when she saw the girl. "A little one who doesn't talk much," explained Robert. "She seems to be alone and mentioned something about her tummy on the phone." Sarah knelt in front of the girl with a warm smile. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm Sarah. I'm a nurse. Does something hurt?" The girl briefly looked at Sarah, then at Father Michael, and then fixed her gaze on the ground. "Can I see your tummy?" asked Sarah gently. "I promise to be very careful." With delicacy, Sarah moved the girl's arms away and gently palpated her abdomen. Robert noticed it was slightly swollen, but not alarmingly so. "There don't seem to be any external injuries," murmured Sarah, "but this area is quite tense. We should take her to the health center for a complete evaluation." "Is it really necessary at this hour?" intervened Father Michael. "Perhaps she could stay here tonight and tomorrow we can try to locate her family." Robert and Sarah exchanged a look of concern. "I'm sorry, Father, but an unaccompanied minor, possibly ill, needs immediate medical attention," replied Robert firmly. "It's protocol." Father Michael nodded, though he seemed uncomfortable. "Of course, I understand. I was only thinking of her comfort." Sarah wrapped the girl in a dry blanket she had brought. "Come, little one. We'll take you to a warm place where we can take better care of you." As they walked toward the pickup, the girl suddenly stopped and looked back at the large crucifix adorning the facade of the church. Her gaze contained a mixture of fear and something else that Robert couldn't decipher. Pleading? Warning. "There's something more here," Robert murmured to himself as he helped the girl into the vehicle. Sarah started the pickup, and Robert cast one last glance toward the church. Father Michael remained on the porch, watching them leave in the incessant rain, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror, like a silent guardian of secrets that were just beginning to be revealed. The Pine Hollow Health Center was little more than an expanded clinic, with 2 patient rooms, a basic emergency area, and a small laboratory. At that hour of the morning, only the security guard and an auxiliary nurse kept the place functioning. While Sarah examined the girl in one of the rooms, Robert searched through local records for any reference to a missing girl who matched her description. He found nothing. "Any news?" he asked upon returning to Sarah. The nurse shook her head. "I've done a preliminary physical examination. She's malnourished and has intestinal parasites, which explains the abdominal distension and possibly that sensation of movement she described. She also has some old bruises on her legs, but they could be from normal falls in children." "Has she said anything else?" "Not much, but I gave her paper and crayons, and she drew this." Sarah showed him a childish drawing where there appeared to be a large tree and a female figure next to it. Thick blue tears fell from the woman's face. "It's quite expressive for her age," commented Robert. "What do you think it means?" I'm not a psychologist, but clearly she's processing something painful. At that moment, the girl, sitting on the examination table with her legs dangling, looked directly at them. The tree heard her, she said in a clear voice, surprising them. When she was crying, Robert approached and sat in a chair in front of her. Who did the tree hear, little one? The lady, she replied, pointing to the figure in her drawing. The one who came before. And where is that lady now? The girl lowered her gaze. She left. But I hear her sometimes, she added, gently touching her swollen abdomen. Robert and Sarah exchanged concerned looks. There was something disturbing in the way the girl spoke, mixing reality with what seemed to be elements of some story she had been told or had witnessed. I'm going to look through the parish records, decided Robert. Father Michael has been here for over 10 years. If there was a woman in trouble who sought refuge in the church, there should be some record. Be careful, warned Sarah. The father seemed quite evasive back at the church. Before dawn, Robert was back at the parish. Father Michael received him with evident nervousness. Agent Hayes, how is the girl? Stable but concerning, replied Robert, carefully observing the priest's reactions. Father, I need to review the parish records from recent years. The girl mentioned something about a woman and a tree. The color left Father Michael's face. Our records are quite basic, he said, leading Robert to a small office. Just baptisms, communions, funerals, in a rusted filing cabinet. Robert found folders organized by year. While reviewing, a loose file caught his attention. It was an incomplete report about a pregnant woman who had requested asylum at the church approximately 7 years ago. There was no name, just a note. Case reserved for pastoral reasons. What does this mean, Father? He asked, showing him the file. Father Michael paled. An old case. A woman in difficulties who briefly passed through here. What kind of difficulties? I cannot reveal details. Confession secret. Robert noticed how the priest avoided looking toward the window, which overlooked the church's backyard, where a huge oak rose next to the small cemetery. Back at the health center, he found the girl asleep and Sarah reviewing some laboratory results. I found references to a pregnant woman who passed through the church years ago, he informed her in a low voice. The father was very evasive about it. There's something else, said Sarah, showing him a report. The intestinal parasites explain part of her discomfort, but there's something strange in her pattern of abdominal movements. It's as if she was interrupted when the girl woke up startled. The tree, she exclaimed. The cemetery tree is calling me. The girl's agitation was difficult to control. She kept repeating that she needed to go to the tree, that someone was calling her. Finally, Sarah had to administer a mild sedative so she could rest. This obsession with the tree isn't normal, commented Robert as they both had coffee in the small staff room. And Father Michael is definitely hiding something. Do you think a child psychologist should come from the capital? Asked Sarah. Maybe, but meanwhile, I think we should talk to the father again. That afternoon, Robert returned to the church. He found Father Michael in the confessional, although there were no parishioners at that hour. The priest seemed to have aged 10 years in one day. Agent Hayes, he said upon seeing him. I was expecting you. I think we need to talk. Robert nodded, following him to the sacristy, an austere room with a wooden table and a crucifix on the wall. It's about the girl, isn't it? Began Robert. Father Michael removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. Her name is Hope, he finally said. At least that's what we called her. So you did know her. Last night you acted as if you'd never seen her. The priest lowered his gaze. I was afraid, not of you, but of what this might unleash. Father, a little girl is suffering. I need the truth. There was a long silence before Father Michael began to speak again. 7 years ago, a young woman arrived at our parish. She was pregnant, scared, running from something or someone. She never gave many details, but she asked for refuge. I offered her to stay in the small room next to the sacristy. How long was she here? Almost 2 months. Her pregnancy was advanced, but didn't seem to have complications. One night, the father paused, visibly uncomfortable. She disappeared, left a note saying she had to continue her journey, that she couldn't stay. I searched the surrounding areas, asked in neighboring towns, but no one had seen her. And what does the girl have to do with this story? Approximately a year later, I found Hope abandoned on the church porch. Just a baby with a note that said, "Take care of her as you couldn't take care of her mother." There was no signature. Robert tried to process this new information. And you decided to raise her yourself? Without reporting it to the authorities? Michael shifted uncomfortably. The system doesn't work well in places like this, Agent. I thought she would be better here, with the community caring for her. Mrs. Wilson, the baker, looked after her during the day. I took care of her at nights. It worked for several years until what? Until she started talking about the tree, about voices she heard, about things moving in her stomach. I thought it was childish imagination. But then she began having episodes like last night, where she insisted on going to the old oak in the cemetery. "What's with that tree, Father?" The priest avoided his gaze. "It's just an ancient tree. It's been there since before the church itself." Robert noticed the evasion. "I think there's more to this story, Father, and I need to know everything to help Hope." Father Michael rose abruptly. "I've said all I know, Agent. Now, if you'll excuse me, have parish duties." As Robert was leaving the church, his phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice tense and urgent. "Robert, you need to come back. Hope's complete examination results arrived, and there's something unusual. It's not just parasites. There's rhythmic movement in her abdomen that doesn't correspond with any normal pattern, and she keeps insisting that she calls her from the tree." "I'm on my way," replied Robert, quickening his pace. "Don't let anyone else see her, especially Father Michael." Upon arriving at the center, he found Sarah pale, repeatedly reviewing some papers. "What's happening?" asked Robert. "It's impossible, but the ultrasound shows what appears to be a heartbeat. But it's not hers. It's as if there were something else." They both headed to Hope's room, only to find it empty. The window was open, the curtains swaying with the breeze. On the bed was a new drawing, the oak, larger and more detailed than before, with something buried among its roots. The rain had returned, softer but persistent, when Robert and Sarah arrived at the church. The square was deserted, and the temple doors closed. Without wasting time, they went around the building toward the small cemetery in the back. The old oak rose majestic and somber at the back of the graveyard. Its branches extended like ancient arms over the tombstones weathered by time. And there, under the tree's shadow, was Hope, standing, motionless, her gaze fixed on the base of the trunk. "Hope," called Sarah softly, approaching cautiously. "You scared us. Why did you leave like that?" The girl didn't respond or move. Only when they were by her side did they notice she was holding something in her hand, a small crucifix that she seemed to have taken from the chapel. "She told me where to look," Hope finally murmured, pointing toward the exposed roots of the oak. "She's here below, waiting." Robert looked at the ground where she was pointing. The earth seemed recently disturbed, but not obviously so. Only a trained eye like his would notice it. "Hope, who told you to come? You too here?" he asked calmly. "The tree lady," replied the girl naturally. "The one who cries. She says nobody listens to her except me." A chill ran down Robert's spine. In his decades as an agent, he had learned to trust his instinct, and now it was telling him that something terrible lay beneath this tree. "Sarah, take Hope to the truck and wait there," he indicated, taking out a small folding shovel that he always carried in his emergency kit. "I need to check something." Sarah hesitated. "I can't let her go alone," said Hope, clutching the crucifix. "She's afraid." Robert and Sarah exchanged concerned looks. Finally, they decided that Hope could stay, but at a distance under Sarah's protection. Robert began digging where the girl had pointed. The earth was wet from the rain, which made the task easier, but also caused the mud to accumulate quickly. After approximately a foot and his shovel hit something. Fabric. A piece of what appeared to be a dress blackened by moisture and time. With more care now, he continued digging around, gradually revealing what had been hidden for years. Human remains. Robert stopped, feeling a weight in his chest. His experience told him. These remains had been here a long time, probably years. "Sarah," he called with a tense voice, "call the state authorities. We have a situation." While Sarah made the call, Robert noticed that Hope had approached and was looking at the excavation without fear, almost with a strange familiarity. "She doesn't cry as much now," said the girl, looking at the remains. "But she's still sad." Among the remains, Robert distinguished something else, a small bundle wrapped in a discolored cloth. With extreme care, he partially uncovered it. What he saw made his heart sink. These were the remains of an unborn baby still attached to what had been its mother. "Oh my God," murmured Sarah, who had returned and now saw the same thing he did. A noise startled them. Father Michael was there, pale as a ghost, observing the scene with horror. "You shouldn't have dug," he said with a trembling voice. "Some things should remain in peace." "Did you know about this, Father?" asked Robert, indignation growing inside him. But before the priest could respond, Hope spoke again, with a clarity that was disturbing in such a small child. "He brought her here when she fell asleep forever. He said it was God's will." The next 48 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The state prosecutor's office sent a forensic team, the small Pine Hollow square filled with official vehicles, and the peaceful mountain town became the center of attention for regional media. The preliminary results of the autopsy confirmed what Robert already suspected. The woman buried had died during a complicated childbirth, probably without adequate medical assistance. According to experts, she had been buried there between 6 and 7 years. Hope remained at the health center, now under care of professionals sent from the capital. Her physical condition gradually improved with treatment for intestinal parasites, but she kept talking about the tree lady and her connection to her. Father Michael had been taken to give a statement, though he wasn't formally detained. His version of events, as Robert was informed, was confused and contradictory. He admitted having known the pregnant woman but denied knowing of her death or burial. Robert was in his office reviewing notes when Sarah entered. "How is Hope?" he immediately asked. "Better physically," replied Sarah. "The child psychologist is working with her. But there's something you should know. Preliminary genetic analyses indicate that Hope is not biologically related to the buried woman." Robert straightened in his chair. "What? But then, who is she? And why such a strong connection with the tree woman? We still don't know. But the psychologists suggest that Hope might have witnessed something related to this woman's death, even though she was too young to consciously remember it. The trauma could be manifesting in this sort of communication she feels with her. Robert reflected on this new information. "I need to talk to her again." At the health center, they found Hope drawing. Her expression was calmer than days before, though she still had that look of knowing more than she should for her age. "Hello, Hope," greeted Robert, sitting next to her. "Do you feel better?" The girl nodded. "It doesn't move so much anymore," she said, pointing to her abdomen. "The doctor says the bad bugs are going away." "I'm glad to hear that. Hope, can I ask you something about the tree lady?" The girl looked at him with those deep eyes that seemed to contain the knowledge of the world. "She's calmer now," she responded, "because she's not alone down there anymore." "Do you remember when you first saw her?" Hope seemed to reflect. "When I was very little. She cried a lot. Father Michael prayed for her, but it didn't help. I heard her at nights. She told me to help her." "And did you know she was buried under the tree?" "Not until recently. She showed me in dreams, said it was time." A chill ran down Robert's spine. "Hope, do you know who your mom or dad is?" The girl shook her head. "Father Michael says they left me at the church because I was a special angel. But the tree lady says I came to help her." That moment, a nurse hurriedly entered. "Agent Hayes, you have an urgent call." It was Martinez, his colleague from the station. "Robert, Father Michael has disappeared. He left a letter in the sacristy and is gone. Nobody knows where he is." "What did the letter say?" "It's disturbing. He talks. About unforgivable sins and God's will. He mentions Hope as the child sent to expose our faults." Robert hung up, feeling that the puzzle pieces were beginning to fit together, though the complete picture remained blurry. Back with Hope, he found her looking out the window toward the direction where the old oak stood, invisible from that distance. "Do you know where Father Michael is?" asked Robert, without much hope of getting a useful answer. To his surprise, Hope nodded. "He went to look for forgiveness," she said simply, "but he won't find it where he's looking." Sarah, who had been observing, approached. "Hope, do you remember when you told me something was moving in your tummy? Can you explain exactly what you felt?" The girl gently touched her abdomen, now less swollen. "Like butterflies, but stronger. The tree lady says that's how it feels when there's a baby. Growing." She knew. Robert and Sarah exchanged looks. The connection Hope felt with the deceased woman went beyond what could be rationally explained. But at that moment it seemed to be the key to understanding everything that had happened in Pine Hollow. 3 months had passed since that rainy night when Hope called the emergency number. Pine Hollow had gradually returned to its routine, though something fundamental had changed in the town. The silence that previously covered the cobbled streets like a blanket now seemed different. It was no longer a silence of peace, but of secrets, half revealed. The woman buried under the oak had been identified as Maria Hernandez, a young woman from a coastal town who had disappeared 7 years before. According to the investigation, she had arrived at Pine Hollow seeking refuge, pregnant, and without resources. Father Michael remained missing. His letter, analyzed by experts, revealed a man tortured by guilt, though he never directly admitted responsibility for Maria's death. The authorities were looking for him, but in mountainous regions like that one, it was easy to disappear. For Robert, the case had left a deep mark. He was 60. After a career dedicated to helping others, he had rarely faced something that affected him so personally. That morning, as he packed his belongings into boxes, he had finally decided to retire. He found something he had almost forgotten, the recording of Hope's call. He played it, listening. Again to that little voice whispering, "There's something moving inside my tummy." He decided to keep a copy, a reminder that sometimes the most important truths come from the smallest voices. Before turning in his badge, Robert made one last visit to Sarah. To his surprise, he found Hope playing in the garden of her house. "She lives with me now, temporarily," explained Sarah. "While her legal situation is resolved, social services are looking for an appropriate adoptive family, but until then." Robert observed the girl, so different from that frightened little one of the rainy night. Now, she smiled. Her cheeks had color, and her gaze had lost part of that disturbing intensity. "Does she still talk about the tree lady?" he asked quietly. "Less and less," replied Sarah. "The psychologist says it's a good sign. She's processing what she experienced in her own way. But she still draws trees, many trees. And physically? Completely recovered. The parasites disappeared with the treatment. She no longer feels anything moving inside her." Robert approached Hope, who now looked at him with recognition and a shy smile. "Hello, Hope. Do you remember me?" The girl nodded. "You're the man who came when I called on the phone," she said. "The one who wasn't afraid to dig under the tree. How are you now? Are you happy here with Sarah?" "Yes," she replied, and then added in a lower voice, "And the tree lady is happy now too. She's not alone anymore." Robert felt a lump in his throat. Despite everything he had seen in his career, the capacity of children to process trauma and find healing always amazed him. "I'm glad to hear that. I'm also more at peace knowing you're both okay." That afternoon, before officially turning in his badge, Robert drove to the Pine Hollow cemetery. The old oak was still there, imposing and silent. The grave where they had found Maria now had a proper headstone, with her name and date. "I don't know if you can hear me, Maria," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that Hope is safe. She has people who care for and love her. She's not alone anymore, just like you." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the tree, like a sigh of relief. Back in town, he noticed how the residents looked at him with a mixture of respect and wariness. For many, he was the one who had exposed a secret they preferred to forget. For others, the man who had finally brought justice. The case would never have a perfect closure. Father Michael remained a fugitive. Many questions remained unanswered, and Hope's true identity and origin remained a mystery. But something had changed. Silence was no longer complicit. In his last act as an agent, Robert presented a detailed report on the case, including a special section on detecting vulnerable minors in isolated rural communities. He specifically requested that a protocol of regular visits to these towns by social workers be established, so that no other child would be rendered invisible as Hope had been. "We'll miss you around here," Susan, the operator, told him when Robert handed in his badge and gun. "Nobody cares about difficult cases like you do." Robert smiled melancholically. "There will always be difficult cases, Susan. I just hope those who come after have the same determination to solve them." That night, now at home, Robert took out the recording of Hope's call and stored it in a small digital player that he decided to always carry with him, not as a somber reminder, but as a reminder that the smallest voices are sometimes the ones that reveal the most important truths. 6 months later, Robert received a letter from Sarah with several photographs. In them, Hope smiled broadly, wearing a new dress and her hair in pigtails. Next to her appeared a young couple, her new adoptive parents. The family would live in the capital, where Hope would have access to good education and psychological follow-up. The last photo showed the girl planting a small tree in what appeared to be the garden of her new home. "She says it's so the tree lady will always have a place to visit her," Sarah explained in her letter. "The psychologists say it's her way of processing everything that happened and closing that chapter. It's amazing how children find ways to heal that adults can't even imagine." Robert placed the photo in a frame on his table. Each morning, looking at it, he remembered why he had dedicated his life to protecting the most vulnerable, and how even in the darkest case, hope could emerge. In Pine Hollow, things had subtly changed. A new priest, young and committed to the community, had arrived to replace Father Michael, who still hadn't appeared. The old cemetery oak was now regularly visited, and there were always fresh flowers on Maria Hernandez's grave. The story of the tree girl had become a local legend, though transformed by time and rumors. Some said she could hear the dead, others that the tree itself had given her a special gift. But for the few who knew the true story, hope represented something much more important: the courage of a little girl who, in the midst of her own suffering, had found a way to ask for help and, in doing so, had given voice to those who could no longer speak. A year after his retirement, Robert received an unexpected visit. Hope, accompanied by her adoptive parents, had asked to see him. The girl, now 7, had grown several inches and seemed radiant with health and happiness. "I wanted to give you something," she said, handing him a framed drawing. It was a surprisingly detailed illustration for her age. A huge oak under the rain, and next to it, a silver-haired man, extending his hand toward a small figure. In the sky, some clouds formed what appeared to be the smiling face of a woman. "That's you, the day you found me," explained Hope. "And above is the tree lady, who now watches over us both from heaven." Robert felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time, a mixture of gratitude and amazement at the resilience of the human spirit, especially when it comes in such small packages. "It's the nicest gift I've ever received," he said, crouching down to her level. "I'll keep it always." Before leaving, Hope approached and whispered in his ear, "Sometimes I still feel things moving inside me, but I'm not scared anymore. My new mom says they're butterflies of happiness. That night, Robert placed the drawing on the main wall of his living room. It wasn't just a reminder of the most impactful case of his career. It was a testimony that even in the most forgotten places and the most difficult circumstances, a small voice could trigger great changes. And as he looked at the smiling face drawn among the clouds, Robert reflected on the words he had written in his final report, words that had now become his personal philosophy. There are pains that don't heal with silence. There are truths that only children have the courage to whisper, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply listen.